We cut taxes for the first time in 16 years to create the economic growth. The tax cuts were designed for growth. They created more revenue because they put people back to work. We reformed welfare so that 65% of the people on welfare either went to school or went to work, which had a double effect. It took them off Medicaid, it took them off welfare, it reduced government spending, and because they were now working, they were actually paying taxes, so you have a double positive coming out of the whole experience. We reformed Medicare in the middle of a presidential election while becoming the first re-elected Republican majority in 68 years. Not since 1928 had Republicans won re-election. Now I say that as background because what I'm about to describe to you is not theoretical. If you go back home and you get together and you say, all right, what kind of state do we want? Now, what would it take to get to that kind of state? Now let's talk about the budget we need. You will find yourself in a fundamentally different conversation than starting with the current government and the current budget and trying to cut it. Because if all you're doing is trying to cut things, you maximize the scream from every person who's losing money and you minimize the support from everybody who'd have a better future. It's a fundamental question of how you approach governing. Now, in that setting, I want to give you a handful of examples of how to think about the future. A couple of them are federal, most of them are state. We will announce next week at the National Press Club an American Solutions Plan for jobs, take-home pay, and prosperity. And let me make a key point to all of you. We are today in the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression. The Federal Reserve reported the day before yesterday in a report that all too few people have looked at, that first of all, they believe unemployment will be higher than they thought it was going to be 2 months ago. They think it will clearly be 10% or more. But more sobering than that, they reported that they believe when the recovery comes, there will be no new jobs. You'll get more economic growth with people being more productive, with no one being hired. And they project 5 years with no net new jobs. That means we're saying to every young person graduating from high school and college, you are going into the worst unemployment environment since the 1930s, and your government is doing nothing to make it better. And let me be clear about that. We did not pass a stimulus package in January. We passed a politician's bailout package. That money all went to the states and local governments to pay it so that they could avoid making tough choices. We actually slowed down the very reforms we need. And in some states, they were so unwise that they took all the new money, cut nothing, and had a bigger budget than they did last year, which means their 2010 budget session is going to be a nightmare. Some of you may be in those states. Well, 2 + 2 = 4 would tell you, if you're in this size economic problem, the earlier you're honest about it and the earlier you start fixing it, the less painful it's going to be. And the more you lie to yourself, the more painful it's going to be. So, next Wednesday we will announce, and I think the #1 job of the government today is to get the economy growing again. I'm tired of being told we have 7,312 priorities, and by the way, one of them might be jobs. This government should can all the stuff that doesn't create new jobs and should focus as its only major order of business for the next year, getting the American economy growing again and getting real jobs for Americans. Now, we're going to propose 4 tax cuts. And I think you need all 4 to work synergistically to get a dramatic increase in economic growth. The first we're going to propose is a 2-year, 50% reduction in the Social Security and Medicare tax, both for the employee and for the employer match. And there's a very practical reason for this. Most people in America are not going to get pay raises in the next couple of years, but they could get a raise in take-home pay. And if you had a 50% reduction in the Social Security and Medicare tax, every working American would have more take-home pay, be more able to pay off their debt, and be more able to survive the current environment. And if you're self-employed, the combination of that and a reduction in the matching would give you a substantial increase in liquidity. And for the small businesses, which are the key job creators in America, if they could keep 50% of their current match for their employees, their cash flow would be much better, their liquidity would be better, their requirement for credit at a time when the credit system is almost totally paralyzed would go down dramatically. They would both survive better and they would grow faster, and you'd be back on the road to growth. So we believe that's the first building block. The second building block, if you want to compete with China, is very simple. Match China in capital gains tax, which is 0. If we had 0 capital gains tax, we would be the most rapidly growing economy in the world. Investment would pour into the United States, and we begin to be the best place on the planet to build the next factory. Third, if you really want your businesses to grow, create jobs, and compete in the world market, match Ireland for the corporate tax rate, which is 12.5%. I was first told this by Craig Barrett when he was the head of Intel, who pointed out that the difference between the highest, when you combine state and federal taxes, the highest corporate tax rate in the world is the United States. And the result is Microsoft puts all of its licenses in Ireland because they're not stupid. You want to pay 12.5%, or do you want to pay something like 39%? Now again, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Even for most elected officials in Washington, you would think you could get them to understand 12.5, 39. They don't, which is why they'd like it to go to 46, which would make us even less competitive and kill even more jobs. Finally, if you really want capital investment and you really want to create small business and you really want to encourage entrepreneurs, abolish the death tax permanently. If you are trying to encourage the work ethic, if you're trying to encourage savings, if you're trying to encourage the kind of investment that creates jobs, if you're trying to encourage people to think about their families and their children and grandchildren, it is absolutely destructive to take away their lifetime savings when they die, and it is morally wrong, and we should eliminate it permanently. And those 4 changes would jumpstart the American economy in a matter of months, would dramatically increase the flow of savings into the United States, and would lead to dramatic job creation. And you could pay for them by a variety of steps which I outlined in my newsletter this week, which you can get at newt.org, and which we'll be outlining in detail next week at the National Press Club. But as somebody who actually did author 4 consecutive balanced budgets, I just want you to be comfortable that I am confident, given the size of the current budget in Washington, the current waste, the current bureaucracy, and the current political interference, we can find more than enough money to offset pro-jobs, pro-growth tax cuts if you have people who really want America to grow again, as opposed to giving power to politicians. As part of that growth, we have to have an American energy policy that focuses on American sources of energy, the opposite of the government's current policy. Let me say, first of all, many of you helped us last year with Drill Here, Drill Now, Pay Less, which actually changed the debate, and for the first time in 27 years, it is currently legal to look offshore. I'd urge all of you to help us. We are gathering up comments for the Department of the Interior, which up through September 21st is accepting comments on whether or not to, under what circumstance for the next 5 years to allow drilling and regulation. This is a very important step for America, and those of you who are in states that have potential access to offshore ought to be looking at that as a significant source of revenue without raising taxes. And I find it doubly mystifying that California, giving all its pain and given the objective reality that there is so much oil in the Santa Barbara Basin that it leaks, the Santa Barbara Channel leaks annually the amount of oil that was in the 1969 spill. It occurs naturally.